Alright class, today we're going to go over chapter 42. This is Hazardous Materials. It is on page 1379 in your textbook. I encourage y'all to follow along. Print out your little paper so y'all can take some notes and stuff and kind of follow along in your textbook. I'm going to this is a lot of information, but it's a pretty short chapter, so I'm going to kind of highlight the stuff that you all need to know for your test to move forward and that sort of thing. So first of all is, what is a hazardous material? In your textbook, it has a pretty lengthy definition on page 1380. In a nutshell, hazardous material is any kind of substance that can cause harm to our body, whether it be a chemical or whether it be some other kind of substance. It doesn't really matter. If it can cause harm to our body, we consider it a hazardous material. Some stuff that you probably need to know for National Registry is going to be, we talk about the type of damage that this material can cause to us. And they use this acronym TRACEM. Number of times I've applied this to my actual practice is 0. The number of times I've seen it on tests, National Registry, pretty frequent. So make sure that you are familiar with this acronym. What it means is what type of damage is hazardous material composed to you. T's, thermal, radiation, asphyxiation, chemical, etiological, which is something that's biological, and then something mechanical that causes harm to you. Okay, I thought I'd throw these up here because these are different agencies that kind of govern hazardous material, kind of oversee hazardous material. The Department of Transportation oversees any kind of hazardous material that's transported on the highways. If you are transporting some kind of hazardous material, the Department of Transportation mandates that vehicles have play cards on them so that rescuers can help identify what kind of material is on that vehicles transporting stuff. As far as, see here, 9 classes of hazardous materials. You can find this on page 1364 in your textbook here. You don't have to be super familiar with this, just kind of get a general idea. There are play cards, and you can kind of look at these 9 different classes on this page. We'll get to how you can identify these in a little bit. Other thing the Department of Transportation mandates that these vehicles have on them is a play card with different colors. So red, blue, yellow, white. It'll be kind of this little square broken up into other little squares, and each square will have a number of 1 through 4, or 0 through 4. 0 being not very dangerous, 4 being highly dangerous. So like if you have a red 4 here, that means it's highly flammable, very unstable. If it has a 0 in the red here, then it's not very flammable. The blue is for health hazards. The green is going to be for its instability or stability. And then the white is going to be special hazards. You all do need to know this for your test. So know these 4 different squares. Know what red stands for, know what blue stands for, know what yellow stands for, know what white stands for. You don't have to know exactly what 0 is, or what 1 is, or what 2 is, but have an idea of these colors and what they stand for. All right, moving on. I'm going to bounce over to here. So safety data sheets. These used to be called material safety data sheets. Now it's just safety data sheets. These are required for every business in the country. If you have any kind of chemical substance on your working premises, you have to have a piece of paper that tells what hazards this material could cause to your employees or your guests or people. I mean, this goes as far down as if you have Lysol under the sink at a business, you have to have some kind of safety data sheet somewhere on the premises about this. Does every place abide by this? Well, no, probably not, but anyway, they're supposed to have these available for you. So if any of your employees or any of your EMS workers, any guests gets exposed to some kind of chemical at a work site, you should be able to figure out what they're exposed to, what it's going to cause, how to decontaminate them, that sort of stuff. Anyway, know those are out there. Poison Control Center, your book brings up. I used to tell students all the time, it's like Poison Control Center, like download it on your app or download it on your phone. And now I will tell you differently. Poison Control Center is worthless in the field. I had a patient last year that took some medication, and I took quite a bit of it, and I was trying to figure out what was going to happen to my patient. They are already having cardiac dysrhythmias and stuff, and it was a young kid. And I called Poison Control Center hoping to get a little bit of feedback on what this deal is, how much of it is toxic, what to expect, how do they treat this patient. And it a lot of bureaucracy paperwork that they wasn't gonna get back to me for like 3 to 6 days. And I was like, my patient's getting really sick now, I need some answers right away. So if you're looking for answers right away, I would say call the ER. Poison Control Center is not gonna help you. That was kind of news to me. I spent like 20 years telling people to call Poison Control Center until I realized that they're kind of worthless in the acute setting. So anyway, it's listed in your book as a resource. Emergency Response Guide. There's a picture of this in your book, and it's a book about yay tall and about yay wide. It's mandated to be on every ambulance in the country. They are orange, and what they do is they identify all these different classes of hazardous material. If you look on this page, you'll see a bunch of different kinds of examples of labels for hazardous material. So this book right here, it has every one of these on there, so you can look it up and kind of reference it. Also nowadays they have a app on your phone or on the computer. It's called Wiser. You can also like take your phone and you can look up all these different kinds of play cards and hazardous material markers on an app on your phone or on the computer. So Wiser is what that is. You should be familiar with all of these also. If I put it on the board, it's probably important, all right? I left out a lot of this chapter because you're probably not going to deal with most of this in your line of work unless you go into firefighting or you do like hazmat training or something like that. So coming down here, general rule of thumb, if you're dealing with hazardous material, and kind of the old school method is like everybody always told me going through school, it was like stick your thumb up, and if you can cover the site with your thumb, then you're far enough away. I don't really like going with that little theory, but anyway, that's what they used to always say. Keep you a distance away. So this is an acronym that you should be familiar with. You probably see again with the National Registry on a test somewhere, and this is RAIN. Recognize, avoid, isolate, and notify. So if you show up somewhere and you suspect something's off, you be the detective. We all know we show up on scene, you're like, something seems a little bit off, something smells a little funny, that looks a little weird. You recognize that it's weird. Then you try to avoid the scene. There are hazmat teams out there, fire departments, the EPA. These people will show up on scene, figure out what you got going on, and figure out whether you can enter the scene or not. If there's some kind of life-threatening emergency, somebody's dying, you need to get to them, get them out of there. Use your own judgment on that call, but I would say number one is protecting ourselves, number two is the partner, number three is our patient, right? So kind of size up whether it's worth going into these scenes to get a patient out or not. Ideally, we want to avoid it until we figure out what the threat is to us and how we need to protect ourselves when we go in. All right, moving on. All right, class, continuing on, chapter 42, hazardous materials, page number 1379. We are going to move on over into incident command. So once we've got somewhere and we did this RAIN, right? So we've recognized that we're trying to avoid, we're trying to isolate ourselves, and we notify people. When we notify people, we're going to try to set up an incident command. Incident command will show up on scene and kind of take control of everything. Everything works underneath that incident command. Wherever you work at, every agency is going to have some kind of plan in place. They'll have equipment stored somewhere. They'll oftentimes have a mobile trailer that they take out and set up, and they have decontamination booths and kind of this whole thing all set up. So all this they plan for, they prep all this stuff and store all this equipment. This is part of your pre-incident planning, right? So you're planning for some kind of like hazardous material spill or incident. And then when something happens, that's going to be implementation of your plan. Your textbook goes through these little steps here. They seem kind of straightforward to me, but anyway, you implement the plan, then when you show up, you establish safety zones. This is important for you all. You may see this, probably will see this on a test somewhere. Your safety zones, your center is going to be your hot zone. This is where your hazardous material is located. It is somewhere in this hot zone. And keep in mind, we're talking about like contamination, especially when we talk about radiation or any type of hazardous material. The longer we're exposed, the longer we're contaminated by this material, the higher concentration it is, the level of protection that we have. Like all this plays a factor into what kind of risks we're going to put ourselves at when we go in this hot zone. Ideally, like us EMS people, we should never be in the hot zone. People that go in the hot zone are going to be people working for the EPA, they're going to be people working for the hazmat team, maybe the military. This hot zone is not a place for you or I, unless you have special training. So, hot zone is where hazardous material is located. This warm zone is still a zone where we try not to go into. The warm zone is gonna be for decontamination of people. So whenever the people come out of the hot zone, whether it be workers or whether it be patients, they come into this warm zone, and that's where they go through a decontamination process. And in your textbook, it kind of walks you through a 9-step process that's on page 1392 if you want to look at it. You're not going to have to memorize this 9-step process, but it kind of gives you an idea of what happens when you come into the warm zone. They will have you kind of take off all of your clothes that has been contaminated, and they'll put you through a shower, and all the water that hits you is now contaminated also, and then they'll give you some clean clothes and this sort of stuff. And then once they get you all stripped down, hosed off, then you can go into the cold zone, which is where EMS is going to evaluate the people, evaluate the workers, do an EKG on them, and then maybe transport it from there. If by chance you get a patient, you can't decontaminate them, but you need to transport them because it's an emergency, take the person and put them in a body bag and zip it up to around their neck, put something around the top of their head to cover their head. In a nutshell, you pretty well want to cover their whole body except for like their breathing, their airway area. Wipe all this down with clothes. If you transport them in the ambulance, you need to call the hospital, let them know that you're bringing in a contaminated patient. And then also your ambulance is going to have to go through a decon process also before it can be used again. Okay, so probably going to see this again, you all. If we come over here to like radiation, your book talks about radiation. Radiation is a little bit different animal. We talked about it some with like the bombs that were dropped over in Japan in World War II, and then Chernobyl, I think it was 1986, somewhere around there. A lot of exposure to radiation. Radiation we can't really see, so it's kind of hard to identify. Exposure and contaminated, I think we talked about in chapter 2 maybe, but they bring this up again here. If you're exposed to something, that just means you're in the vicinity. It's not necessarily on you or in you. If whatever the hazardous material is gets on you or in you, in case of radiation, then you're contaminated. So just the difference between exposure and contamination. With radiation, like we were talking about just a second ago, how long you've been exposed, what's the distance to the source of the radiation, and then shielding, what do you do to protect yourself from radiation? Any kind of barrier helps. The thicker the barrier, the better off. People wear lead in the hospital lots of times for x-rays, for radiation. Lead works really good. Concrete, dirt works pretty good. And oftentimes, instead of like trying to protect ourselves and hang lead over us or concrete or whatever, which seems kind of crazy, you can't really do that. It's like whatever the hazardous material is with radiation is to cover it with dirt or cover it with concrete. And that's going to help reduce the exposure that we pose ourselves when we go in. And then quantity, like how much radiation is there in the area, right? Your book talks about 3 different problems that arise from radiation. It talks about radiation sickness. I believe it's not my area of expertise, but I remember your book talking about radiation sickness is nausea, vomiting, loss of appetite. This stuff can last for a few days to a few weeks. Usually kind of runs its course and it ends up being benign in most people going forward. When we talk about radiation injury, this is talking about a localized burn, usually. So some specific part of the body that got a high amount of radiation that caused some kind of sore to the body. If we talk about radiation poison, this takes it to another level as far as like pretty severe internal damage to the body. These outcomes can oftentimes be fatal. Alright, radiation. Moving on over, there are different types of radiation, which we don't get into in this class, but just be aware there are different types of radiation. Coming over here, your book kind of ends up at the very end talking about possible exposure to drug labs and terrorist attacks. Drug labs, the main thing I remember hearing about was like meth labs. Meth labs can be explosive. They are small, they're mobile lots of times. They can make meth out of like just little tiny boxes that are portable in a backpack nowadays. I haven't ran into too many meth labs in my day. I've seen some that exploded and caught on fire and burnt down. I remember going to a call in Louisville. It was a person in a car, unconscious, unresponsive, and we showed up, and in the window they had a big sign that said, "Do not open, call hazmat." And I have no idea what was in the car, but the person looked dead. We called the hazmat team. We ended up leaving because it was gonna take a while to get there to figure out what was going on. But I remember that was just kind of one that stood out. It's kind of odd to me. And then down here, terrorist attacks. Terrorist attacks could be a whole range of different types of stuff they could use. Hopefully you don't get into stuff like nerve agents and whatnot, but any kind of like bombs, any kind of big attacks, terrorist attacks, just be aware that it could be hazardous material. And so kind of recapping a little bit, you all, your big takeaways from this is you need to know these acronyms. You need to know, everybody probably knows what hazardous materials are. You need to know this acronym, TRACEM. You need to know what part DOT, OSHA, and EPA play with hazardous materials. You need to know these 4 colors of the play card and what 0 to 4 kind of means. 4 is bad, 0 is not as bad. Coming on over, you need to know what safety data sheets are. You need to know these resources here. Emergency Response Guide, that's your book, this is your app, this one, kind of worthless. Down here, rain, you gotta know rain, you gotta know this zone here. I think that's about it, folks.